over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. Opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife.
Well, greetings. Welcome back. President Trump says that he will make the decision to attack or not attack Iran in 2 weeks, while the Washington Post reports European officials are seeking a diplomatic path out of the conflict and pressing Tehran on its nuclear program before President Trump decides whether to join Israel in bombing Iran. How much of this is serious negotiation versus hyperbole and window dressing? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. Let's take a quick look at a couple of today's headlines. Iran is firing more advanced missiles as Israel is running low on interceptors. A senior Israeli intelligence official told NBC News yesterday that Israel intercepted only 65% of the missiles Iran fired at Israeli territory over the previous 24 hours, as the Iranian military has started firing more advanced weapons. Quote, Iran still has very advanced missiles and they are making use of them, adding that Israel has less time to react to the missile launches. And remember, we had Laith Marouf on probably Tuesday, and he made the point that Iran, in its initial barrages of missiles, was using older, I won't say antiquated, but older technology, and they've been really holding back on their more current technological missiles. And this statement now proves Laith to be correct. The Washington Post is reporting Russia tells U.S. not to strike Iran, warns of nuclear catastrophe. Russia is telling the U.S. not to strike because it would radically destabilize the Middle East, according to Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, and he said this on Wednesday, and that Israeli strikes risked triggering a nuclear catastrophe. And it's important to remember that Russia has a signed strategic partnership with Iran. They also have a relationship with Israel, but they have a signed strategic partnership with Iran. And finally, judge orders Colombia protester Mahmoud Khalil released from ICE detention. And this just happened, I want to say, over about the last hour. Khalil was arrested in early March. A federal judge in New Jersey ordered his release more than 3 months after the former Columbia student was first detained. Michael Farberaz said today, again, about an hour ago, that has granted his release while his case proceeds. On today's episode, the issue before us is Donald Trump trying to argue the United States into a regional conflict in the Middle East, if not the possible start of World War III, which would be the war to end all wars, because it could wind up ending the planet, the existence of the planet as we know it. My guest is an international geopolitical consultant, global speaker, author, veteran, and former international security analyst in Washington, D.C. He's the founder of Global Perspective Consulting, which is headquartered in Dallas, Texas. Dr. David Oualaalou. David, welcome back.
Good to be with you, Wilmer.
So let's start here. President Trump says that he's going to make this decision about whether or not to get involved within the next 2 weeks, quote, based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future. That's what Trump says. This while the Wall Street Journal reports that he's already privately approved the attack plan, but he's just waiting to issue the final order. And finally, it's reported in the Washington Post that European officials are seeking a diplomatic path out of the conflict by pressing Tehran on its nuclear program. Now, David, I doubt that Iranian officials are in Geneva with the European negotiators. I don't doubt that they're in Geneva with the negotiators, but why should Iran take any of this seriously, since they were in negotiations over the past few weeks, and those talks seem to be more of an attempt to distract Iran than a serious effort to reach any type of peace agreement? Where are we, David Oualaalou?
Well, that's true, Wilmer. The idea of that Iranians are realizing that they've been deceived by the Americans. I mean, it should be no-brainer for them to understand that it was Trump who pulled the U.S. out of the JCPOA to begin with. So why would you trust Trump to sit back with him at the negotiating table for a second round? That becomes on you, per se. As to Trump thinking about, as a matter of fact, to my knowledge, the idea of dropping the bunker buster was supposed to be this weekend. And now Trump is changing his mind. Of course, Trump is going to change his mind 3 or 4 times before the decision is made. And that decision, that doesn't mean he is the one making it. That decision will be imposed on him by the special interest groups, especially we're talking about the AIPAC here. But the idea, that's the American-Israeli Political Action Committee. But the idea here, in my opinion, as one who spent time in the region and understanding the dynamics of how it works, what's taking place right now, especially with Iran deploying some, not all, some of its advanced systems, like the one that hit Tel Aviv yesterday morning, Fatah, this missile is called Fatah, which it was produced in 2022 and are into service in 2023. Apparently, what it became clear is that the Iron Dome was unable to intercept such missile. Let alone, Iran has fired or launched about 400 missiles. And that gives you an idea that Israel now isn't really stuck and counts on the U.S. to conduct the war on its behalf. And this is why Donald Trump now, he's thinking in terms of, I mean, his legacy is tarnished already to begin with, because here is the president who said, he's the one who said, we want to pull out of war, not get into war. So by the time, let's say in 2 weeks, a lot can happen between now and then, and Iranians not going to hold back, and they're going to move forward, whether Israel or the U.S. likes it or not.
Your thought, again, I had Laith Marouf on from Beirut, Lebanon earlier in the week, and he made the point that up until this point, Iran has been using much its older missiles, basically burning through its old stock, not really concerned about whether they broke through or not, and that they're getting to the point now where they're moving towards their much more sophisticated hypersonics and much more accurate missiles.
Yeah, which this one proved my point, is that the idea that Iran used a missile Fatah, which is it's considered an advanced system. Now, as to the hypersonic, I am not aware yet that some specific types of hypersonic have been used. Enough to say that so far the Iron Dome proved ineffective in stopping all the missiles, because by the time the Iranian missile lands inside Tel Aviv, as we always say in international relations, optics matters. The fact that a missile landed inside Tel Aviv, it tells you the story right there. It is my belief, Wilmer, and I hope I don't know. What I feel is that if the US gets involved into this, this could be the last nail on the coffin for us. Iran is no small matter. And the fact that we get in with this attitude of, oh, it's just Iran, it's not going to cut it. We couldn't even defeat the Houthis, let alone Iran. So we're going to have to think twice about engaging into a costly war that is not our war to begin with. And as I said earlier, once you start seeing the body bags coming in, it's not going to be pretty for Mr. Trump.
There are those who make the argument that during the 2016 campaign and administration that Trump had visions of receiving the Nobel Prize. There was this narrative bantied about by some that he's going to be a peace president. When you looked at some or listened to some of the initial banter regarding the Ukraine conflict, some thought he's trying to find peace. I don't see how at this stage of the game, that's a pipe dream. Your thoughts?
Well, you're absolutely correct, Wilmer. It's too late for that anyway. The fact that he is considering engaging in a war, whether it moved forward or not, the fact that you have entertained the idea, the Nobel Peace Prize, it's gone. It's a foregone conclusion. But again, this one highlights, in my opinion, that Trump is not in charge. The decision is not at Trump's hands. The decision is passed on to Trump to do what he is being told to do. And that shows exactly how controlled our government is, despite what we hear and what we say. It is one thing I need your audience to understand. As one who wrote a book about Iran and did the research on it, there is a much bigger picture at play here. This is not about just the nuclear program. This is about the US-Israel strategy in the Middle East and ensuring that the capabilities will remain in favor of Israel. In other words, no country in the region should have that military capability to challenge Israelis. That is what's at stake here, and the US is aware of that, given also how our sort of hegemony in the Middle East is going down, let alone from around the world.
If the United States were to be foolish enough to use this 30,000-pound bunker buster at either the Natanz or the Fordow facilities, you're looking from what I've been able to determine somewhere between 620 versus about maybe less than 1,000 miles between one of those two facilities and Tel Aviv. So if you either destroy or just severely damage one of those two facilities, radiation is going to be released. For sure. And if the wind's blowing in the right direction, you're now going to have a nuclear cloud floating over Israel. So you know the landscape. I've been to Iran twice, but you know the landscape better than I do. That that to me doesn't make any sense.
Well, indeed, Walmer, the idea, first of all, that the bunker buster is going to do the job, it's an illusion. Let me just tell you this straightforward for your audience to know. The 30,000 pound, it's not going to cut it. The reason being because the structure inside the underground structure in under the mountains is not a flat land, is not a flat building. It's built in a way, at least according to some sources that I talked to,
diffuse impact.
Exactly, and he built in a way that when the missile, when the bomb goes out, it's just gonna get diverted one direction or another. So it's not gonna destroy the entire system per se. Second thing is the radiation. What you mentioned, is Israel ready to deal with the nuclear fallout for that? Because Iran is 20 times the size of Israel. So you do the math and think about Iran will be covered into this. And this is what I believe why Mr. Trump decided to delay this particular targeting of Iran, because he's realizing, whomever is advising him, that this might not do the job. So why get involved in something that is not winnable? Because the idea of us defeating Iran with this assumption that it's non-starter to begin with, and this is where you have a lot of voices sort of with cool head prevailing, saying the obvious. You need to think twice before you engage Iran.
Carlos Paleo, thank you very much for joining us and becoming a new member. Yesterday, Peace in the World, at the end of the show, Peace in the World made a $50 donation. Thank you. And it came as we were getting out and did not get a chance to recognize Peace in the World for that very generous contribution. Thank you very, very much. If I know this, I don't know anything compared to what you know relative to these things. But if I know this and you know this, why aren't we hearing this on mainstream? That's kind of a rhetorical question, but yeah. I mean, this whole thing about attacking Fordow, to me, the comparison I would draw is Chernobyl, in the Chernobyl reactor catastrophe. That's what the United States, if they were to use this bunker buster, would be trying to create. And it can only blow onto Israel. It makes no sense.
No, it doesn't. And because the system under the mountains in Fordow location are very deep the ground. Because here's the thing, that bunker busters, even if it goes, it's going to go about 50 down. You're looking at the system installed at about 300 down. So even with going with that, it's not going to destroy the system. And this in itself will give the Iranians the opportunity to say, you know what? Let's move on with building the bomb and be done with it.
Especially when they can say, we took your best shot.
Exactly.
We took your best shot. It didn't work. Now we're going to teach you a lesson.
Exactly. And that is exactly where I see even for the double standard of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, who released the report saying, which was, by the way, it's doctored. It's not true. What the IAEA cannot be trusted to begin with. Just look for what they did in Japan and how Grossi, the Secretary General for the IAEA, was on the take because there was some bribe involved. IAEA is under pressure from the United States to issue the statements that the US wants. So as a justification for attacking Iran. But with this going on, Iran will have few options in front of it. One of them will be, you know what? Let's move on with developing the bomb. Even if it will be just conventional bomb, that will at least deter Israel from moving forward, because now they saw what the Iranian missiles are landing inside Tel Aviv, can you imagine with moving forward with a bomb?
But now the IAEA yesterday or Wednesday released a statement that Iran does not have at the current time a nuclear program. And then we, of course, Tulsi Gabbard said the same thing before the Senate, to which Donald Trump said, I don't care what she says. So, Donald, where are you getting your information from?
Yeah, and right there, it tells you the story literally. As I'm sure your audience is familiar with what we call the PDB, the Presidential Daily Briefing. That's usually presented by the CIA or the top analyst inside the agency. And usually it works by providing you this kind of information. Well, if the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, saying there is no program, and you saying, you as a president saying, I don't care, that tells me the story right there, that you don't care what the PDB estimate says. You're going to go with what you are being told. Oh, there is a nuclear activity. We are moving forward. And once again, I am convinced that there are forces behind the scenes that navigating this particular aspects regarding the engagement of the United States in the war, including two major players, that Lindsey Graham and Senator Ted Cruz here from Texas, which, by the way, he doesn't represent me.
So what's the end game? If we know if the bunker buster did work, and you just explained very clearly why. Okay, so we start with bunker buster won't work. So why are they championing the use of it? If it did work, it would create a nuclear radiation problem that would affect the very people that want it to be used. All you're doing really, Israel, is swatting the hornet's nest, really going to piss off the Iranians. And those are some folks you really don't want to mess around with. So what's the end game?
Well, one of the key concern, at least for us here in the US, if we get engaged, and if we do, expect that Iranian allies in the region, including Hezbollah and the Houthis, will engage. And if they do, that's going to be a nightmare for the US as far as military installations, which, by the way, this morning, it was an order from the Pentagon to move certain aircrafts and certain fighter jets and so forth from the Gulf states. That tells you the story right there about our concern based on what just happened regarding the launching of the Fatah missile, which is the Iranian advanced system, that those fighter jets in Qatar, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, and United Arab Emirates, all will be within range for that. So the end game for us is the concern that if we are to get engaged, this is going to expand beyond. We're not even talking yet the support of China and Russia and possibly North Korea.
And let's add another element to this. And I always say to the audience, when we start having these conversations, I think it's important to look at a map, because if Iran does go into full combat mode, then the Persian Gulf gets shut down.
For sure.
We know that the Houthis have already shut down the Red Sea.
Yeah.
So maritime traffic, particularly oil flow to the globe, for the most part, is done until they change their minds and decide they want. So people now need to start thinking about, do you want to pay 3 times as much for oil and gas as you're paying now? Because that's going to be an immediate and dramatic impact.
Well, for sure. To my knowledge, is that the Iranians have already placed ordnance in the water in the Strait of Hormuz for this particular eventuality in case something happens. That means they are capable of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. You shut down the Strait of Hormuz, you're cutting down 20% of the global oil supply to the rest of the world. And like you stated, Wilmer, it's going to triple or quadruple the prices at the gas pump. Already, Europe is suffering, and I just came back from Europe. Europe is already started now concerned about the prices of gas, knowing that Iran is one of the top producers of gas. And the second thing to all this, and this is why I mentioned the China and Russia earlier, is because China has signed a 25-year deal with Iran. That's a $400 billion deal that's going to want to see it return on its investments. So the Chinese will have to do what every country will do when you invest your money, be it through the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, or the bilateral agreements with Iran. The same concept applies to Russia, except in Russia's case is much more, given that you have a Russian scientist right now in Bushehr nuclear power plants. You're looking at about, to my knowledge, between 500 to 600 scientists. So, and to me, the statement the Russian President Vladimir Putin made, it's a message to the United States. You better think twice about targeting that particular facility because we have our citizens there. It is my belief, Wilmer, that both the Russians and the Chinese will do what's need to be done to support Iran in taking stand on all this.
Well, to your point, Russia has already said to Israel, Russia has said to the United States, don't do this.
Don't do it. You're right.
And I mentioned that in my open. Putin has been very clear, do not do this. And I haven't heard President Xi Jinping say anything, but I can only imagine. In fact, again, just to reiterate, not only has Russia said don't do this, Russia has signed a defense pact with Iran. And when Biden sent, I'm trying to remember which aircraft carrier it was, into the Mediterranean, I think it was Eisenhower, into the Mediterranean, or it might have been the Gerald Ford, into the Mediterranean, if I know the story correctly, Putin called Biden and said, why are you doing this? You're not scaring anybody. These people don't scare. And by the way, we can sink your carrier from here with these Kinjal hypersonic missiles. What are you doing? And so I don't know how much of that is true. That's what I was told transpired. So I'm going to ask this question again. Why are they doing it? Are they believing their own press clippings? Do they think that there is some type of survivability here? Is this just some crazy Israeli Zionists and Christian Zionists thinking that they're going to create the rapture and they're bringing about the end of the world and Jesus will come? I mean, or is there one answer to that question?
Well, you have to look at this from two angles, Wilmer. One is that the Israeli influence on the U.S. government. You look at the mouthpiece of the Congress, for example, like Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham, who are advocating for sending American troops. You know, if I am to say this, then I'll say to Mr. Trump, why don't you send your kid? Why don't you send the Baron? He turned 18, so he can wear the uniform and go fight on behalf of the American people. Even though you and I know we have no interest into this war. But the influence of the lobby, Jewish lobby inside the US, or the Israeli lobby, I'm sorry, it's very influential. Second thing is that for Mr. Trump himself.
Yeah, but wait a minute, David. But what are they advocating? That's if you create a nuclear cloud that floats over your country, where's the upside?
Well, they are not thinking of it in these terms, Wilmer.
So clarify, please.
Yeah, obviously, they are not thinking of it in these terms, which make more sense. You destroy a nuclear power plant, you're going to have a radiation flowing, depending again on the wind, the direction, and so forth. But why run the risks? Why run the risk? Those ones who advocate for the U.S. entanglement there, they don't care for something like this, because the thinking is, oh, we're just going to get into our bunkers and we will be fine.
Okay,
I don't think so.
survivability.
Yeah,
They believe they can survive it.
Yeah, and even in Israel now, you know what this attack by the Iranian exposed? It exposed the inequality that exists into Israel, even for the bunkers. And I got a word that some bunkers are not allowing other ethnicities to get in. If you are not a pure Jew, you won't get in. And that becomes like questionable in a major catastrophe where you have the masses, just dropping like flies. So second part to that, before I forget, regarding Mr. Trump is realizing that his tariffs have backfired. So now we have a problem with the interest we are paying on the debt in itself. So like I always think in terms of when everything else fails, what they end up doing? Taking you to war. Because a war machine is going to distract the population from seeing the reality where it is. That's the only other aspects that I could think of, because Mr. Trump has been exposed regarding his rhetoric as far as threatening other countries with tariffs and so forth. And he's realizing that the world, he's not realizing, as a matter of fact, he's not realizing that the world has changed. We have entered into a multipolar order.
You're talking about the bunkers reminds me of a Twilight Zone episode where there's a group of 3 or 4 couples having a Friday evening dinner party. A message comes over the radio that a Russian nuclear bomb is on its way to the United States. And the guy that owns the house, he and his wife go into their bunker, which is only big enough for 2 people, leaving everybody else in the house exposed. And it just shows the dynamic of what happens. You're telling me that, just reminding me of this Twilight Zone episode. Israel's defense minister says that Ayatollah Khomeini cannot continue to exist. And even Donald Trump has said, we know where you are, we can kill you when we want to, and we'll decide what we do with you when we decide what we do with you. If that's true, horrible idea. If it's just a threat, ridiculous thing to say. And it's illegal, by the way. Dr. Oualaalou.
Well, Wilmer, here is the thing. Your last word as about the illegality of it. For us, our system now violates all the laws that you and I know. For example, even with this conflict, if the U.S. will to get involved, what is the first thing of business we need to have? We need to have the approval of Congress, because it's Congress that declares the war. We disregarded that for the last decade plus.
Right.
So we don't have any respect for the Constitution whatsoever, and that tells you the chaos that exists inside the U.S. regarding this aspect. So moving forward with this, the idea of that, what Mr. Trump is going to be thinking as far as engaging with Iran, it's ludicrous. It just doesn't make any sense for us to get involved. Regarding the idea that the statement, we might know where you are, I will not rule that out.
Sure.
Because here is the thing. The one thing also we need to understand is that Iranians, we just move on with life. You replace whomever. Israelis were able to take 3, as a matter of fact, 4 of the top leadership, 3 in the military and 1 scientist. They're going to be just being replaced and move forward. The same thing, I believe, about Ali Khamenei. I am sure there is somebody already been designated in case that happens. But you're absolutely correct. It will be illegal for us to do so, because we did that with Qasem Soleimani back in 2020. But this exposes one particular, what's the word I'm looking for? Short spot for the Iranians, and that is they have been infiltrated.
Right.
If you know where Ali Khamenei's location is, that means there is a mole inside, deep down inside. And I think the Iranians were able to arrest now about 20 individuals from India who happen to be spying on behalf of Mossad. There is a major campaign of arrests as we speak inside Iran right now for the spying, because they have been infiltrated from that aspect. But taking out the head of a country, that kind of crosses the line beyond what we can even imagine.
And there's another element to this, and that is be careful what you wish for, because you might get it. So, because some would, looking at Khomeini's fatwa against a nuclear military program, and he has not rescinded that fatwa. There are more, I'll say aggressive, I don't want to call them radical. Yeah. There are more aggressive elements within the Iranian government that are saying, no, we need to play hard in the paint. We need to go tit for tat. And Khomeini is saying, no, we're not going to do that. He is somewhat reserved compared to what you could get if you eliminate him. Yeah. So be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it.
Well, that is true regarding the fatwa or the religious decree that Ali Khamenei has mentioned, that they are not interested in that. But there are hard elements inside Iran. It's like every other government. I was last week before I flew back to the US, and I had a chance to meet an Iranian who happens to be a member of the Mujahideen-e-Khalaq, which is an opposition organization that is a hardcore MEK that has some support from Congress regarding this. And even with that, some of them is like, attacking Iran. No, it's a no-go. You have that elements of, there's some elements inside the Iranian government that they want the other directions. Like, you know what? Go and develop the bomb, because if you do, we won't have these issues. Now, the only sign I will see to that, if I am looking for signs, it will be if Iran withdraw from the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. If they do that, then that's it. It's a green light to go ahead and develop the bomb.
Thank you, Dr. Nick, for pointing this out. Middle East Eye reports Iranian missiles strike across Israel, damaging Microsoft office. Iran today launched a wave of attacks across Israel, including a direct strike on a technology center, a Microsoft office, and military infrastructure. The missile assault consisted of 20 missiles, including, according to Israeli media, it hit Gush Dan, the Negev region, and Haifa, which wounded 17 people. So again, it seems, David, what I think a lot of people are failing to understand as they look at how Iran is doing this. I mean, I have no intelligence that this is based on. This is just my opinion. People are mistaking their restraint for weakness.
Yeah.
And what the sense that I get from other people that I've talked to is they're a lot like Russia in that they don't really have an offensive military mindset. They have a defensive military mindset. And so they've been manufacturing and stockpiling missiles like Russia for a very long time. Yeah. And if you want to get into an artillery or military or a missile exchange with them, that's exactly what they want you to do, because that's the design of their process. We'll launch missiles all day, every day for the rest of days, because they've just stockpiled missile after missile after missile after missile. So are people mistaking their restraint for weakness?
Well, you're right about that assessment, Wilmer, and I couldn't agree more, because that's really how some in Washington, at least during my time in DC, was that kind of thinking. Oh, Iran is not going to do any of that. Well, it's not that they can't, it's just they don't want to. And don't misinterpret that as a weakness, because if it comes to survival, you're going to see the whole country united. Because if you look at the history, and I'm going to go back all the way to the era of Alexander the Great, who couldn't conquer that one. It's because Iranians come together, and it would be no different than when it was back then. You look at the war against Iraq, as much as we were providing weapons for Iraq to defeat Iran, and Iraq couldn't. It's just the idea of when they are using restraint, we are interpreting it as a weakness, and that's a mistake on our part to be thinking in these terms. I believe if the U.S. gets involved and stop bombing, you're going to see the whole country, Iran, that is, unite, and they're going to that's it, because they got nothing to lose at that point.
I'm glad you said that, because I remember one of the feelings that I got from being in Iran and traveling all over the country, lecturing at a number of universities, and just talking to people in the street. You will get an incredibly diverse perspective on a number of issues, but when you talk about invading their country, boy, let me tell you, those folks don't play. They can first of all, they're incredibly well-read. They're incredibly intelligent people, so they can talk to you about anything you want to talk about. And again, you'll get incredibly diverse perspectives on a plethora of things. But when it comes down to defending Iran, oh man,
that's one thing they have, literally, and this is nothing new. Literally, for those who have read the history of the emergence of the empire, of the Persian Empire, rather, and how it evolved over time, even during the colonialism era. We're talking about back in 1200s and so forth. Even back then, the Russian Empire and the British decided to carve out Iran at that time. But even with that, they stood the test of time, and they managed to survive. So this will be no different. And this is why, and I'm going to state once again my earlier statement, that if the U.S. gets involved into this will be the last nail on the coffin for America. Because we all saw what happened in Afghanistan. We all saw what happened in Iraq. We all saw what happened in Somalia. We all saw what happened against the Houthis. And Iran is a different ball game altogether.
I'm gonna pose this question from Kevin, and Kevin, thank you very much for the super sticker. But Kevin, I need you to clarify something before we answer it. When you say to Dr. Oualaalou, what are your thoughts on the Chinese and Russians taking advantage of this situation, both in Ukraine and Taiwan? Kevin, what do you mean when you say taking advantage? I want to be sure I understand the intent of your question before we answer it, because we could take, in my opinion, that can go a couple of ways. So if you could, Kevin, answer what you mean when you say take advantage, then we'll answer the question. So that kind of threw me off a second. So talking about, well, another reason why you don't want to talk about assassinating a leader of a particular country, in my opinion, is because you then subject yourself to either a preemptive strike or a retaliatory strike.
And even the third element to that, Wilmer, is the idea of your credibility. Is this how you resolve issues? Is this how you deal with the complexity of what geopolitics is all about? Is this how you handle international relations? Just because you disagree with the leader, you're going to kill him? It's just, to me, it's ludicrous. It's the idea that, but again, what can we expect from certainly the last 30, 40 years in our country? And again, I look in our country first before I'll say anything about another one, because it's my country. That's what I need to look at. And when you look at the leadership that we have produced for the last 30 or 40 years, it makes you just wonder, because that's a sad part to see where we are and where we have been heading moving forward. So you kind of makes you just wonder what lies ahead for America, the way you and I used to think about the United States.
In terms of the domestic politics behind this,
yeah,
and you've mentioned Ted Cruz, you've mentioned
Lindsey Graham.
Yeah. There's a Wall Street Journal article, MAGA brawls over prospect of Trump joining strikes on Iran. In recent days, White House officials have quietly reached out to MAGA influencers, according to people familiar with the matter, aiming to explain Trump's possible shift away from a diplomatic solution. So there seemed, and you've got people such as Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are saying this is not a good idea. Matt Gaetz is saying a Middle Eastern war will pull America back 20 years. So from a domestic political perspective, it seems as though Donald Trump has some internal MAGA issues that he has to work through before he thinks about pulling the trigger on this thing.
Well, that's why I said earlier, Wilmer, the idea of his legacy now is going to be defined by the decision that's going to be made within a week or two. That's going to define his mind. We already know how the first term went. You know, if you ask anybody who at least have an understanding of what's been transpired for the last decade or so, you ask them about, you know, what do you make about Donald Trump's first term? The first thing that comes to mind is going to be, oh, he's the guy who withdrew from an international agreement unilaterally. So it's the same thing is going to happen with this. Should he decide to move forward, and this is why you have MAGA now pushing back against that one. But for his legacy is going to be, he's the one who took the U.S. to another war in the Middle East, except this time around, the nail has been put on the coffin for the U.S. because we are not coming out of this the same way we think we could do the way we did in Afghanistan. Iran is not Afghanistan. Iran is not Yemen. Iran is not Iraq. And we better think twice before we engage. We're not scared, of course, but the idea of why engage in something that you have less probability of winning, and just sending our troops to end their life short, 18, 20, 19, 21, 23 years old are dying for no reason. They don't even know why they will be going to Iran to fight for. And if you ask any of them, said, I don't know why I'm going for. And second thing is, if Israel decides to engage into this, then that's its war. Don't get involved in something you can't handle. And Israel doesn't have the capabilities to engage Iran alone. It won't be able to. It won't survive. And that's not a secret. It's information that is known to whomever understands the military dimensions of conflicts such as this one.
So I didn't see any clarification, so let's just go to the question as posed.
Yeah.
Dr. O, what are your thoughts on the Chinese and Russians taking advantage of this situation, both in Ukraine and Taiwan?
Yeah. I think the way I understood this question, and if I'm not wrong, is that the idea of a strategic aspects of it. And probably what he meant is taking advantage, not in a negative way, but rather is keeping the US engaged in this part of the world so they can stay away, meaning the United States can stay away from Central Asia, okay, or the Caucasus, and from the Pacific. That is the way I understood taking advantage of this one here. So. And second part to that is that both countries, Iran, Russia and China, have some interest that they have to protect.
Mhm.
So to them, if keeping the American occupied with, or busy rather, with fighting Iran, that's going to create for Russia and China some window of relief, if I may use the term, to really reconsider certain other aspects of their policies.
Final question on Iran before we move to Ukraine. The report again that the Europeans are supposed to be in Geneva negotiating with the Iranian negotiators, and they keep talking about, and all these reports in the West, they keep talking about Iran's nuclear program. There is no nuclear weapons program. They will allude to the uranium enrichment process, which is not illegal. So help me understand, what is the basis of this argument?
Well, it's easy, Wilmer. Just, I'm sure your audience know, go back to 2003, prior to 2003. What was the argument regarding Iraq? Oh, Iraq is developing nuclear stuff. The more you sell that argument, the more the population become convinced. You know, it turns out that the whole invasion was based on a lie. And that is the argument they are trying to use once again. And this is why you see in Donald Trump lashing out at Tulsi Gabbard for stating that Iran has no nuclear program. So yes, Iran developed the enrichment uranium to about 60%, which, by the way, 60% could allow you to develop conventional, not the same nuclear weapons that require 90% enrichment. So they are 30% off. That doesn't mean they can't do it.
Right.
They can do it if they want to. But for the American government is to sell that argument. So people, it's the same scenario we saw prior to the invasion of Iraq. No different.
So as I have been saying, folks, they're lying to you.
Exactly.
They're just flat out lying to you. And you know, one of the things that I have found, and I saw this Wednesday on 2 MSNBC programs, is they lie by omission and they lie by commission. And they don't, for example, in fact, this takes me into two places. For example, on one of the shows, they asked this so-called expert, well, why is Iran doing this? And his answer started with the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Oh, well, if you understand the Iranian Revolution and they overthrew the Shah, they hate America. But he never talked about Mohammad Mossadegh. He never talked about the United States overthrowing their democratically elected prime minister. He never talked about, had we not started that fight, we wouldn't be in this fight. And so he didn't talk about the Shah as a dictator. He didn't talk about the Savak as this almost paramilitary secret police force that was disappearing people and murdering and torturing people. He didn't talk about any of that. He just said, oh, in 1979, they overthrew the Shah. They've been angry at America, and this is why we are where we are. So people have to be very, very careful in terms of what they're hearing. And again, there are lies of omission by them not telling you the context, and there are lies by commission where they just flat out tell you things that they know are wrong.
Well, that's why I believe, channels like yours really kind of break down this kind of confusion and simplify it for the listeners to have a better understanding of this. That I've always tell my community, do not just buy whatever you hear. Be careful, be aware of what you are listening to and so forth. And this so-called expert is not going to be addressing that fact because it's reality. We removed or took out Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh because we didn't like where the direction of Iran was going. We did the same to Mohammed Morsi in Egypt by allowing the military to do the bidding for us, the Egyptian military, that is. And this takes me to the big picture, Wilmer, that I like your audience to understand about this conflict between Israel and Israel, US, and Iran. This is about a much bigger picture, and that much bigger picture is the Israeli-American strategic partnership in the region by preventing any country from developing any capabilities or having an independent strategic decisions. That is what's at the heart of it. The US and Israel wanted to keep it that way. Just look around for all the Gulf states. They won't move an inch without the approval of the US, or they cannot attack or contradict Israel and so forth. Look at Egypt, look at Jordan, look at Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates. You get the idea.
Kevin Baptiste, I guess since we answered his question, he's now become a new member. Kevin,
well, that's great.
And we did answer his question. So Kevin, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate that. So let's just quickly move to another conflict in the world, and that is looking at the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. President Putin made a couple of comments, and one is he's saying that Russia is not seeking surrender. They are seeking recognition of the situation on the ground. I find that to be an interesting way of presenting it. He says the grounds on which Ukraine became independent and sovereign were set out in the Declaration of Independence of Ukraine in 1991, where it is clearly written in black and white that Ukraine is a non-aligned, non-nuclear, neutral state. It would be nice to return to those fundamental values on which Ukraine gained its independence and sovereignty. And that is those are the major points that Putin has been making since this whole thing started. He has not wavered from that position. Your thoughts, Dr. Oualaalou?
Well, for that one, Wilmer, I was surprised by the statement made by the foreign policy representative of the EU, Callas, when she said, yeah, we're going to have to keep supporting Ukraine. Otherwise, we're all going to be speaking Russians. You know, that's so ludicrous and so stupid for such a representative to make such statements. And that tells me right there, she doesn't understand the core issues for why this whole conflict emerges or erupted, which, by the way, we have facilitated and created that. So the idea that, and that's why the Russian president, I believe, in one of his statements said that, and I'm just trying to paraphrase here, that he will be willing to sit down with the comedian Zelensky, but at the last time, there is a final deal regarding the agreement. And that makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. Why will he sit down with, the guy is just, I just do not see what Ukraine has to gain anyway. So the Europeans going to be using it till the end, till whenever, but nothing's going to change. And that's what surprised me about the election of the new Polish president. His first statement was how sort of assertive regarding being anti-Russia and so forth. And didn't make sense to me at all.
Why? It seemed as though when Zelensky came to the White House and was slapped around and sent on his way, he didn't go back to Ukraine. He went to London. Mm-hmm. He went, and Norm Clement, thank you very much, Norm, for that $10 super sticker. He went to the arms of was it Keir Starmer, I think, to the open, loving arms of Keir Starmer. And after that, Europe then seemed to ratchet up their rhetoric, and they're talking about we're sending more money into Ukraine. Why are the European leaders so hell-bent on continuing this conflict? Is it because they're afraid that Donald Trump is shifting his focus away from Ukraine towards Asia, and they don't want to appear to be weak because they fear Putin trying to expand the conflict, which we know he's not going to do?
Not true, yeah. Well, already the Russians have exposed the weakness of NATO altogether as a collective organizations, which you and I know, Wilmer, that the era of NATO has been over. The whole reason why NATO was established is because of the Soviet Union. Soviet Union ceased to exist since 1991. So why the heck is NATO is expanding far beyond what it was prior to the fall of the Soviet Union? So it doesn't make any sense. But the idea that the conflict and the Russians specifically exposed this weakness, so the Europeans find themselves, which by the way, they are under the thumb of the US, they found themselves like caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of their so-called independence. You and I know Europe is not independent. Europe has no independent foreign policy whatsoever, despite what we hear about, for example, the French president Emmanuel Macron saying that, well, we need to build our European force. That statement has been just repeated forever. Now, Macron will not do what General de Gaulle did back in the 60s when he truly withdrew France from NATO in retaliation against the US. So I don't see any European leader doing that. So to them, the idea of keep supporting Ukraine is nothing but it just keep their relevancy. That's all it is. Well, do you know they cannot influence events? Without the US, they are worthless.
Final question for you. Putin also made the point to Ukraine, if you think you can deploy a dirty bomb into our space, it will be a very, very bad day for Kyiv. Your thoughts?
Yeah, the reaction to that, I believe it will wipe out Kiev altogether. And frankly, because you're going to be dealing with, I am not someone who advocates for war. I don't. But sometimes you're going to have to deal with these matters once for all. And because if not, this is going to drag forever. I mean, the whole assumption was that the US and Europe were thinking in terms of weakening the Russian economy. It turns out to be the reverse. Russia is far, and Russia produces much more weapon than NATO can do in a year. Russia was able to produce that in a month. So the idea, the conflict in itself exposed the weakness of the US, NATO, and the Europeans.
Well, Dr. David Oualaalou, thank you so much for your time today. I know you just got back from Europe and you fit us into the schedule. Greatly, greatly appreciated as always. And I hate to think that over the next week or so, there's going to be a whole lot for us to talk about. It won't be positive, but look forward to having you back. Greatly, greatly appreciated, David. Have a wonderful weekend.
You are most welcome, Wilmer.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
And I got to thank, we got some new members to the Connecting the Dots Club. Do What's Right. Thank you very much. Carlos Paleo. Thank you very much. Kevin Baptiste. Thank you, my brother. And in fact, Kevin, I may be coming to Oakland on some personal business. And if I do, we'll look to hook up. Wow. Want to thank you all so much for joining me today. Thank you all for, as always, listening to and participating in the Connecting the Dots podcast with me. Stay tuned. New episodes next week. And I just drew a blank on who my Monday guest is, but trust me. Oh, I know the question is going to be, is Donald Trump a fascist? I know that's the question. And I'm drawing a blank on the guest, so please forgive me, but trust me, it'll be worth watching on Monday. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review. Again, do what's right. And Carlos Paleo, thank you all so much today for joining the club. Kevin Baptiste, my brother, thank you for joining the club. We need more of you to do that so we can keep this thing on the right track. Follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting. You know, that analysis by Dr. Oualaalou, I thought, was just phenomenal. Anyway, see y'all on Monday. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. See you on Monday. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.